Welcome to episode 33 of the Obvious Podcast. My name is Sonny. I'm the CEO at ABC Florida East Coast.
My name is Peter Daiga. I'm the president and CEO of Associated Builders and Contractors, Florida East Coast chapter.
The Obvious Podcast is a production of ABC Florida East Coast. Unless otherwise stated, all content reflects the opinions of the guests and the hosts, which is us.
And if you like the Obvious Podcast and our audience is growing, you can subscribe on all the major podcast platforms or watch the audio-visual version on YouTube. You can also follow the Obvious Podcast on Instagram, X, and Truth Social. You can always reach out to us via email at theobvious@abceastflorida.com. Links to all the social media feeds are in this episode's show notes. And if you want to help others find the podcast, please leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice.
How are you, Peter?
I'm doing great.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Welcome to our audience. So today I wanted to talk to you about NPR, right? My whole life when I have thought or heard the name NPR, this is what I've thought of.
Hello, I'm Margaret Jo McCullen.
And I'm Terry Rialto. And you're listening to The Delicious Dish on National Public Radio.
A classic Saturday Night Live episode.
Classic 1990s SNL episode. And the skit itself is very funny.
If you want to find it, what's it called, the episode?
It's called Sweaty
Balls?
Sweaty Balls.
All right. So, any event, Saturday Night Live was making fun of NPR back in. This episode is from the 90s.
This is from the 90s, yeah. So, and it's very funny. Yeah. So, the reason NPR popped into my head is because of in the end of March, I believe it was, the CEO Katherine Maher was in front of Congress.
The DOGE Committee.
The DOGE Committee.
Yeah.
And essentially either asking for money or justifying her budget.
Because there's rejuvenated talk, I guess you will, of possibly privatizing or doing away with NPR, National Public Radio. Yeah. So, which, by the way, is not something new. I think this dates back to Reagan's presidency. I mean, when I first recalled people talking about it. And the good arguments for it, in my opinion, and by the way, I used to serve many, many years ago when I lived in Gainesville on the NPR. I was probably their one conservative nominee at a young age on the affiliates.
Did you notice the bias back then too?
So, yeah. I mean, there's always been a bias, and that's been problematic enough. But I think the strongest arguments for doing away with it is more strong today than even it was, either in the 90s or in the 80s. So, it was one thing in a day when there were three networks, when you would turn your TV on and you might get, three UHF signals across the air, and you needed maybe NPR to create content, that the market wasn't producing. So, but you look now at your choices in terms of access to entertainment and programming. For the government to be in this business, I think the argument today is as strong as it's ever been that it's not something that we need to be in. So, in any event. So the point, I think, of what we wanted to talk about in this episode was the testimony of the NPR CEO.
Yes.
A Biden appointee, I think.
A Biden appointee, Katherine Maher, no relation to Bill Maher.
Yeah. But she was testifying before DOGE, and it was quite shocking. The point of our podcast today, I think, is the CEO of NPR, who was a Biden appointee, was before the DOGE Committee in the House of Representatives in Washington. And some of her beliefs as the leader of the organization kind of came to light and was a little bit shocking, I think. So,
yeah. What really made me think of the testimony was I recently heard a show by Megyn Kelly. And Megyn Kelly did a pretty deep dive into, you remember that school shooter in Nashville, Tennessee?
Sure, the one that they wouldn't release the manifesto for.
They wouldn't release the manifesto for, and Nashville police was like really cagey about what the gender of the shooter was, and turned out it was a girl, but just identified as a boy. Didn't really have anything done biologically to be a boy, but identified as a boy, I believe in early 20s or mid-20s. And so that show that I heard from Megyn Kelly talking about the journal of the shooter was very much rooted in, and the shooter's white, and it's very much rooted in the shooter being anti-white, right? Like just kind of very angry about white privilege, hating sort of the way this country is organized.
All right, now I can see why,
And yeah, you
brought
kind
you
of
back
see
to-
why it brought me back to this testimony.
Sure.
And being very, very confused about her gender and her sexuality and all of that. So that's a whole sort of separate conversation, but it kind of made me think of this testimony that we're going to play for you right now. This was Congressman Brandon Gill from Texas. New congressman, I think he's a freshman.
Yeah, I think he's married to a
Dinesh
daughter of...
D'Souza's daughter.
Yeah.
After I saw this testimony, I thought this guy's going to be a superstar.
Yeah.
Ms. Maher, I want to start with you. Just generally, would you say you generally agree or disagree with the following statement? The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles?
I would not say I agree with that, sir.
You're not. That's good to hear. It's interesting because a lot of your thinking, as expressed by your public statements, is deeply infused with economic and cultural Marxism. Do you believe that America is addicted to white supremacy?
I believe that I tweeted that, and as I've said earlier, I believe much of my thinking has evolved over the last half decade.
It has evolved. Why did you tweet that?
I don't recall the exact context, sir, so I wouldn't be able to say.
Okay. Do you believe that America believes in black plunder and white democracy?
I don't believe that, sir.
You
Don't know where
tweeted
statement
that in
comes from.
reference to a book you were reading at the time, apparently, The Case for Reparations.
I do want to point out, I do love the fact that the congressman doesn't get like overly emotional.
Sure.
So the monotone nature of his voice and her voice made me think of NPR.
Right. It's like fits right in.
It fits right in.
I mean,
with how NPR's kind of
exchange could be a program on NPR, and you might mistake it for
because like you have so many hysterical people in Congress nowadays are like, what, you did that, you said that, and he's like, well, really, you tweeted that?
Yeah, but the difference is when you're on the left, if you just it's an evolution, right?
My thinking has evolved.
My
Correct.
thinking has evolved.
That's right.
It's just no wonder they love the concept of evolution so much.
Right.
It
But
allows them to
somehow,
get away from
what a right winger did 20 years ago is still valid.
Right. Apparently, they're evolving on a lot of things, right? Like we've done past shows, they're evolving on their idea on tariffs. They're evolving on their idea of, anyway, as long as they tag that word on there, I guess it's okay. So
It's almost like Bernie Sanders having 4 houses.
But the thing I want to ask people to just pay attention to, as if you haven't already seen this testimony, is the question is, did she really evolve, or was she virtual signaling
When she tweeted that stuff out.
decades ago? It wasn't even decades.
No.
It was a couple of years.
Yeah,
or
a few years ago.
or she virtually signaling then, or did she really believe it then, and now she's just trying to accommodate her opposition?
Yeah.
Right, by using I've evolved. You can always do that until you can get more power.
Exactly.
And then anyway, pay attention.
Yep.
I don't think I've ever read that book, sir.
You tweeted about it. You said you took a day off to fully read The Case for Reparations. You put that on Twitter in January of 2020.
Apologies, I don't recall that I did.
But imagine.
She took a day off to read it.
Day
but
off to read this
couldn't
book.
even remember that.
And then 4 years later, you're like, I didn't read this book.
Yeah, is she virtue signaling or accommodating?
Yeah.
So anyway, it gets better.
It gets better.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I have no doubt that your tweet there is correct, but I don't recall that.
Okay.
Not his tweet.
Yeah, it's not his tweet, it's her tweet.
She could have said, "Oh, I have no doubt that my tweet's correct."
Do you believe that white people inherently feel superior to other races?
I do not.
You don't. You tweeted something to that effect. You said, I grew up feeling superior. Ha, how white of me. Why did you tweet that?
I think I was probably reflecting on what it was to grow up in an environment where I had lots of advantages.
So did she grow up feeling superior? Is that what she's saying?
Yeah, that she grew up feeling.
I don't think she's really saying that, but that's in essence what she's saying.
Yeah.
She grew up feeling superior.
She grew up feeling superior. And she's like, well, I don't really believe that now.
Oh yeah.
I don't believe that anybody feels that way, sir. I was just reflecting on my own experiences.
Do you think that white people should pay reparations?
I've never said that, sir.
Yes, you did. You said it in January of 2020. You tweeted,
Yes, you
yes,
did.
the North, yes, all of us, yes,
You can
America.
see, even the congressman is laughing. Yes, you did. January 2020. This was
Right.
5 years ago.
Yep.
Yes, our original collective sin and unpaid debt. Yes, reparations. Yes, on this day.
I don't believe that was a reference to fiscal reparations, sir.
This is a person funded in part by government. in large part.
Yeah.
Right?
Donations and
Donations and government. Yeah.
What kind of reparations was it a reference to?
I think it was just a reference to the idea that we all owe much to the people who came before us.
That's a bizarre way to frame what you tweeted. Okay, how much reparations have you personally paid?
Sir, I don't believe that I've ever paid reparations.
Evolution.
Okay, just for everybody else.
I'm not asking anyone
Seems
to pay
to be what you're
reparations, sir.
suggesting. Do you believe that looting is morally wrong?
I believe that looting is illegal, and I refer to it as counterproductive. I think it should be prosecuted.
Do you believe
to the
it's
full extent of
morally
the law.
wrong, though?
Of course.
Of course. Then why did you refer to it as counterproductive? It's a very different way to describe it.
It is both morally wrong and counterproductive, as well as being
You
illegal.
tweeted, "It's hard to be mad about protests," in reference to the BLM protests, not prioritizing the private property of a system of oppression.
Well, by the way, this is not just theoretical, right? I mean, this is happening now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a
isn't-
certain make of cars where the left is justifying the destruction of private property.
Yes.
I've seen people interviewed where they said it's just destruction of property. It's not harming lives in any way.
Wow.
Now, I wanted to take a time out and talk about a little different issue, when it comes to destruction of life. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But for the left, they're justifying then
Yep.
and they're justifying today the destruction of personal property to achieve their goals, to make their points.
I remember
Now, she's denying it under testimony, before DOGE because their funding's at stake.
she's either lying now or she was lying then.
Right, exactly. She's,
Yeah. One of the two.
right.
I do remember one of our early episodes was that clip from CNN with the building on fire. And the guy,
Mostly peaceful protests.
and the journalist called it mostly peaceful protest with literally a building on fire behind him.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not generally speaking unruly.
But all right, let's just wrap this one up.
You didn't condemn the looting. You said that it was counterproductive. NPR also promoted a book called In Defense of Looting. Do you think that that's an appropriate use of taxpayer dollars?
I'm unfamiliar with that book, sir, and I don't believe that was at my
You
time at
tweeted
NPR.
that you read that book, but
I don't believe that I did read that book, sir.
do you think that a few years ago, NPR educated America about, quote, the whole community of genderqueer dinosaur enthusiasts? Do you think that that's an appropriate use of tax dollars?
I was not at NPR at the time, sir.
That's not the question, though. Do you think that that's an appropriate use of our tax dollars?
I think our tax dollars that we use are to be able to provide a wide range of
So I'll
perspectives.
take that as a yes. You do believe that that's appropriate.
By the way, to my point earlier, I was thinking, well, maybe this is a good argument for her case. That NPR was created to provide content that you wouldn't find anywhere else. But literally, there are whole channels now dedicated today to the LGBT community, and and the barriers to entry in terms of broadcasting content are so low. So not even that's really a good argument.
There's no cost to it anymore. You can film with your phone and upload it. Yeah.
Your health advisor at NPR also stated in an interview that, quote, fear of fatness is more harmful than actual fat. Would you like to explain how fear of fatness is more harmful than actual fat? That's an editorial at NPR.
I am not familiar with the editorial, and I don't believe that was published during my time here.
It's called Diet Culture is Everywhere. Here's how to fight it. Do you think that that's an appropriate use of taxpayer dollars?
I think any reporting on health is an appropriate use of taxpayer dollars, yes.
And you think that editorializing that fat is not unhealthy is appropriate?
I don't know what that article is, sir, and I'm not familiar with it, so I
This
couldn't
is
say.
fake news.
Getting a little more strong,
Getting a little punchy. So, I mean, this goes on for quite a few minutes. Brandon Gill, I think, it will be a superstar in the party for sure. And I love how he did the questioning. And what I really am disappointed by or made aware of is the multifaceted way this stuff just seeps into our culture and gets to our kids. And unless you have kids that age and you're paying, an insane amount of attention to what they're learning in school, you don't even pick up on it. And they're destroying children. They're confusing kids. They're creating self-hate in these kids. They're creating all sorts of issues with their ideology, right?
Yeah.
And there's always a price to pay for bad ideas. We talked about that in our episode on tariffs. There's a price to pay for bad ideas.
Sure.
and kind of how they destroyed the middle class in this country, which, if I remember correctly, 38% of jobs were in manufacturing in 1953, and it's like down to 8% now.
Wow.
And you look at this idea and how
We're not manufacturing less, I don't think, are we, in the world? That's a facetious question. I mean, we're still manufacturing things.
Right.
We're still making things.
Right.
In the world. So it's just it's moved somewhere else. It's not like it's gone away because we're not making things anymore.
Exactly.
I mean, in fact, there are some things we're making today, that weren't even around.
Yeah.
So, but you can run into, and again, I mentioned many, many years ago I served on, so I've been involved in this conversation. I think Reagan probably even talked about privatizing or doing away with NPR. So the argument's been around a long time. There are a lot of people right of center that enjoy the programming, and this is the problem with almost any argument, that DOGE has to encounter or overcome, which is the red herrings that will be thrown out. People will be like, but what about this? This was great programming. That's great programming. Sesame Street, I don't know what, on and on and on. It's not that we're not saying that they can do good things. Again, the strongest argument to me is, in this day and age, the good things can be done by the private sector. Mm-hmm. We don't need to be funding through our tax dollars, especially when you realize the debt that we're in and the cost. We've talked about the cost, I think, to all of us, of being in that debt and what it potentially means for the future. So, this is why it's hard actually to make these kind of decisions, because it takes a little bit of.
And the idea that, to your point, when NPR started, you didn't have a lot of content. Mm-hmm. And then to say, well, in 2025, when content is, there's too much content.
Right.
You don't
so
know
much of it.
And that this is somehow.
We really need to be subsidizing content. Yeah. That's the real question. That is the crux of the question, and
that's even a separate question when you realize that the content they produce is so toxic and terrible.
I was going to say, and then add on top of the crux of the question, you realize you have radicals like this who then either, again, to the point of, was she lying then or is she lying now? Yeah. So, but something happened.
I mean, you look at this, and then you look at the $51 billion that we give to USAID, and how
that's been used.
How much terrible stuff's come out of there, right?
Yeah.
And the left's desire to not just have terrible ideas imposed in this country, but then to export them all over the world, right? Like telling Irish people, "Hey, you guys are racist. We're going to give you some money for you to be, less racist." It's just insane to me. And again, there's a price to pay. Like, this is terrible for our children. And this is the kind of stuff that gets into academia, gets into, obviously, the bureaucracy, and it's insidious.
Right. Do we really, all we've learned, I mean, a lot of us learned it a long time ago, but I think it's harder to ignore the power and the manipulation that governments can exert on our lives. Do we really need to be subsidizing that?
Yeah.
It's not a good track record of really, really oppressive governments in the past that had, communications.
A cursory reading of history will tell you that, right?
So any of that. I know it's not that they haven't produced a lot of awesome content over the years, but for my right of center friends, the real question we need to be asking ourselves is, the times have changed, right?
Yeah.
The left especially likes talking about change. Well, this is one thing they're super conservative on.
Yep.
No, and the funding of NPR can't change. But the times that NPR was created have changed. Mm-hmm. They're not needed anymore. The government is not needed in order to create content that's unavailable, because pretty much anything's available.
I saw this chart about the Department of Education and how every single metric when it comes to kids reading, kids math, different grades, since that year the Department DOE was created, I'm talking about the Federal Department of Education.
Right.
That metric has gone down.
Yeah.
Every single one. And so how do you defend that organization? How do you
it's
I get it.
DOE is the USAID of the United States, right?
Yeah.
That's the only reason it's there, really. It's to fund pet projects and to support people who are aligned, with the people who are controlling the purse strings.
Perpetuate bad ideas, and it's terrible. So anyway,
It certainly hasn't helped improve education.
It does not help too.
And I would argue, I don't think NPR has actually helped improve content in the last decade or two. We started off talking about, it was only a few decades ago, they were already making fun of, maybe for a different way, but not even really the content in a way, right? They were making fun of it on Saturday Night Live.
But this is how, right? Like you and I have talked about this. How does the fringe become mainstream? Yeah. And this is how they do it.
It's part of it,
right?
Absolutely.
This is such a huge piece of it. Like you take something so fringe as the gender queer dinosaur enthusiast,
right.
Whatever he was talking
or
about.
to use a few examples that were used in the testimony, justifying the destruction of private property, reparations. You can use a couple examples that, the CEO of the corporation apparently supports or did support until very recently.
And putting it on her public Twitter.
Yeah.
So that's what this episode is called. Did I tweet that?
Just remember, if you get in trouble, your thinking's evolved.
Exactly. You're not who you used to be. All right. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this. Man, time flies fast when you're having fun.
Love the conversations, though, Sonny. I think a lot of other people are loving it, too, and enjoying it. So just us.
Yeah, exactly. We thank you.
So
we are grateful for your support and for watching and listening and subscribing.
And for comments, send us an email, please, at theobvious@abceastflorida.com. Until next time, ciao.